Carl Jung defines the ego as the center of consciousness, meaning it's the part of us that organizes all the thoughts and feelings we are aware of. Essentially, the ego is the I we recognize in ourselves. It's the part that experiences and acts in the world. Jung explains that the ego is shaped by two main factors, the physical or somatic and the psychological. He suggests that the ego begins to form when the body interacts with the world around it. Over time, through experiences and challenges, the ego grows and develops. While we often use the word ego casually, Jung cautions against this, emphasizing that the ego is a profound and mysterious part of our being. Without the ego, we cannot have consciousness. Now, the concept of the ego has not always been a focal point in human understanding. Philosopher René Descartes famously declared cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Now, this phrase expresses his realization that the act of being conscious proves one's existence. A more accurate translation might be, I am conscious, therefore I am. For Descartes, the ego was undeniable. Even if everything else in the world was uncertain, the existence of one's own conscious self could not be doubted. So this discovery of the ego's role is mirrored in childhood development. Young children start by referring to themselves in the third person, like saying, Tommy wants this, before eventually using I. However, a true awareness of the ego, that is realizing oneself as a separate conscious individual, may come later. Jung described his personal awakening at the age of 11, when he suddenly felt he had become fully himself, separate from the world and others. Now, the ego has two main functions. It allows us to perceive the world, that is, be aware of it, and enables us to act with intention. This brings up the question of free will, how much control we truly have over our actions. Now, Jung explains that within the conscious mind, we feel a sense of freedom to choose, but this freedom has limits. Outside forces and events in the world can restrict our choices, as can unconscious aspects of our psyche. While the ego serves as the center of consciousness, Jung challenges its position as the center of personality. He introduces the self, a broader psychic totality that encompasses both conscious and unconscious elements. The ego, as a subordinate to the self, depends on the unconscious for its development and freedom. Jung stresses that underestimating this dependence can have profound psychological consequences. Now, philosophers like Schopenhauer expanded on the idea of the ego by highlighting the difference between the subject, that is the self, and the object, that is everything outside the self. Now, this distinction is critical for understanding our individuality. Jung applied this idea to his concept of introversion and extroversion. Introverts focus more on their inner world, that is the subject, while extroverts are naturally drawn to the outer world, the object. For personal growth, it's important to distinguish between the two so that we don't lose ourselves in the external world or get stuck in our internal one. Now, Jung emphasizes that the ego is not completely independent. It depends on the unconscious mind. This connection can shape our thoughts and actions in surprising ways. Jung advises an experimental approach to understanding the ego and its limits. For instance, when interacting with a client, one must remain aware that the apparent ego may not be the true entity that we are engaging. The therapist may instead be speaking to a complex, a shadow, the anima, the animus, or even the self. This fluidity necessitates an adaptive and discerning approach to communication and interpretation. So, in conclusion, the ego is the center of our conscious experience. giving us the ability to think, feel, and act. However, it is not the entirety of who we are. It is influenced by both external circumstances and the deeper unconscious aspects of our psyche. Understanding the ego's role and its limits can help us navigate our inner and outer worlds with greater awareness and flexibility. By reflecting on the ego, we can begin to uncover the profound mystery of what it means to be a conscious individual.